Okay, we'll begin. So are there questions?
Hello.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah. So in classical mechanics, when you were doing classical mechanics, you said something like if we have like a system of n coordinates and n conjugate momenta,
Yes.
then in that case, if we produce n mutually n charges which have mutually vanishing Poisson bracket,
Okay.
then we can say that the system is integrable.
Yes.
And I mean, that means that we have completely solved the system in some sense.
Yeah, meaning that basically means that you can write down the general solution in terms of integrals, right? You may not be able to do the integrals, but you should be able to write the general solution in terms of integrals.
Yeah. So does this sort of assume that we know completely the form of the Hamiltonian or the Lagrangian in that sense? Like,
Yeah, meaning constructing the conserved charges will require knowing the form of the, otherwise how will you construct the conserved charges, right? If you use an Euler's theorem to construct the conserved charges, you have to start with the form of the Lagrangian.
yeah, like can we sort of say something like let's say we don't yet know the form of the Lagrangian of the theory that we are studying, but we know the symmetries we want it to have. Like for instance, we want it to have Lorentz and translation symmetry,
Okay.
and that will give us at least the existence of some charges.
Yes.
We might not be able to beforehand say that they'll have vanishing Poisson brackets, but if we start demanding things like that, will that like help us fix the theory, like in the sense uniquely
Yeah.
determine
For
something?
a quantum field theory, of course, that means that you need lots of symmetries, right? Infinite number of symmetries, because it has infinite number of degrees of freedom. So
Why
while,
are they
of course,
infinite freedom?
infinite number of degrees of freedom, because if you compare quantum field theory with classical mechanics, right?
Yeah.
It's like at a given time, you need to know phi at every point to describe the configuration. Right? So a
Okay.
quantum field theory is like a classical mechanics, but with infinite number of degrees of freedom.
I see.
So you do need infinite number of conserved charges, but indeed, if you have infinite number of conserved charges, right? Even quantum field theories, there is a notion of what you, of course, you cannot compare two infinities, right? But there is a notion of what you need in quantum field theory to have a fully integrable quantum field theory. And there are examples of quantum field theories of that kind that is known. But in general, the quantum field theories don't have so many symmetries. Just Lorentz invariance and translation invariance is not going to help us.
All right.
Are there other questions?
Sir?
Yes.
So yesterday you said that if the commutator between phi of x1 and phi of x2 is vanishing, that means we can measure both of them simultaneously. Or
Yes.
so
That measurement of one doesn't affect the other. Yes.
Yes. So what is the meaning of measurement? So in quantum mechanics, we have like if we measure a system, the wave function collapses to one of the eigenstate. Here, what will happen if we measure phi of x1? Then will its value at x1 collapse, or the whole field will collapse? Or
Well, it's a given measurement, right? It doesn't collapse the wave function completely into one particular state. So if you measure phi at x1, right, it will project into that subspace, right, for which phi of x1 takes a particular value.
okay,
Right?
okay.
Suppose you have a given operator, right? It will project into an eigenstate of that operator, but the eigenstate is in general, okay, particularly in local operators of this kind, is infinitely degenerate. So
Okay.
it will project it into a subspace, right? Where a phi of x1 at that particular point takes a value phi, particular value, some function of some value. But that doesn't fix the wave function uniquely.
Okay, okay. So to fix the phi completely, we have to measure at all the points.
Exactly. That's right.
Okay, okay.
Any other question? Okay, so if not, let me start. So what we are going to describe today is a generalization of what we have discussed so far for discrete symmetries, right? So far we have discussed continuous symmetries, and we have also seen that continuous symmetries have certain consequences on the matrix elements of operators. Today we'll see whether similar results exist for discrete symmetries. Now, as we have already discussed that for discrete symmetries, there is no Noether theorem, no analog of a Noether theorem. So just from symmetry, we cannot say that there is a conservation law. Nevertheless, we will see that there is something like a conservation law, even associated with discrete symmetries, and it will have appropriate consequences in the quantum theory. So here, because there is no Noether theorem, so starting with the Lagrangian doesn't help, at least for the kind of symmetries that we're going to discuss now. So we'll work with the Hamiltonian formulation from the beginning. So let's suppose that we have a discrete symmetry under which phi r goes to some phi r tilde of x. So phi r tilde of x is constructed, of course, out of the fields and the momentum. Similarly, pi r of x goes to some pi r tilde of x. Okay. And we'll assume that the Hamiltonian is invariant under this symmetry, under this transformation, right? In that case, we say that this is a discrete symmetry. This is a symmetry. So phi r changes to phi r tilde, which is given in terms of phi r. Pi r changes to pi r tilde, and Hamiltonian remains invariant. Okay, so a simple example will be in Klein-Gordon theory. For example, you can take phi of x goes to minus phi of x. Okay, that's a symmetry, and you can also verify that corresponding to that, the pi of x will go to minus pi of x. Okay, and the Hamiltonian of the Klein-Gordon theory is invariant under such transformations. Now, we'll further suppose that the Poisson bracket of phi r tilde and pi s tilde remains the same as a Poisson bracket of phi r and pi s. Namely, it remains delta r s times delta cube of r minus r prime, which basically means that the transformation that we are dealing with, phi r to phi r tilde and pi r to pi r tilde, is actually a canonical transformation. Okay, this is something you have to impose in the Hamiltonian formulation. In the action formalism, of course, you don't have the analog of the pi's, but you have phi of x and t. And there, what you demand is that action is invariant and up to certain total derivative terms. But if you are working in the canonical formulation, then you have to ensure that not only that the Hamiltonian remains invariant, but also that the Poisson brackets remain unchanged. Later on, we will see that there is a way to relax this. Okay, and there is an important symmetry which will actually change this relation. Okay, but for now, let's proceed by assuming that that there is a transformation in the classical theory that satisfies all this. So these are our starting assumptions. Okay, this is what we'll mean by saying that a theory has a discrete symmetry. Are there questions?
Sir, the same thing can be said of continuous symmetry also, or?
Yeah, you can, given a continuous symmetry, you can try to rewrite in this form. Okay. Of course, not everything will not be the same, because, for example, for the Lorentz transformation, as we have seen, right, the Hamiltonian is not unchanged, right? It changes. And typically, the continuous symmetries that doesn't act on time will have exactly the same properties. The continuous symmetry that acts on time, okay, will be somewhat different, and we'll also see the example of a discrete symmetry that acts on time, which will also have somewhat different relations. Okay. But as long as, for example, for space translation, okay, or rotation, okay, they will all follow the same principles. This you can check explicitly. Take the Klein-Gordon action, you have explicit formula for phi and pi, etc. Right? We also have explicit formula for how these things transform, and you can verify that these relations are all satisfied in those cases.
Okay.
Any other question? So now, given this, when you go to the quantum theory, the Poisson brackets become the commutator brackets, or one over I times the commutator bracket. So in the quantum theory, we'll have these relations will translate to phi tilde r pi tilde s equal to I delta rs times delta cube of r minus r prime. So now for the time being, we'll work at t equal to 0, okay, because we are going to build the Hilbert space or the action of the transformation on the Hilbert spaces. Okay, and that's in the Heisenberg picture, we build a Hilbert space at t equal to 0. Okay, and then the states do not evolve anymore. So we'll work at t equal to 0 for now. And the claim is that if all these relations are satisfied, then we can define a unitary operator U in the quantum theory that satisfies these relations. U phi r U inverse is equal to phi r tilde of x. U pi r U inverse is equal to pi r tilde of x. So phi r tilde, let me remind you, is not an independent field, it's some combination of phi r's. Right? That's like in the example that I gave, phi r tilde is minus phi r. Okay? So it's a relation, it's a condition on U that we introduce a U that satisfies these conditions. Okay. So you can ask that how do you know that there exists such a U? So the first answer would be that because all states are created by the combination of phi r and pi r acting on, here I have taken the ground state, but you can replace the ground state by any state. And the point is that in a quantum theory, right, when you are the basic operators in the theory are the phi's and the pi's, right? And when you say that they define the theory, that means any other operator can be constructed out of phi's and pi's. Now take a particular state, right, which I have taken here to be the vacuum, but it need not be the vacuum. Take a particular state and take any other particular states. Okay. Then we know that that other state is obtained from this by some operator acting on this, right? You can just define a matrix, okay? The matrix which basically takes this state to the other state, okay? That's an operator in the Hilbert space. That must be constructed out of the phi's and the pi's, okay? Because every operator in the Hilbert space must be constructible out of the phi's and the pi's. So which means that if we know that, if we know U on the vacuum, okay, or U on the starting state, okay, which we'll discuss in a few minutes, that if you know U on the starting state, you can define the action on any other state, right? Because any other state is obtained by phi's and pi's acting on the vacuum, okay? And by using these relations, okay, you can figure out what any other state, how U acts on any other state. Is this point clear? Any confusion here? So in particular, in the free client.
Explain this once more.
Explain this one. So okay, let me try to do that. So let me, maybe I should go to the. So let me give the example of a Klein-Gordon theory. Okay. So in the Klein-Gordon theory, you start with the vacuum, and suppose you want to know. Suppose I know U, what U does on the vacuum. Okay, let's leave that aside for now. Okay. And a generic state in the Klein-Gordon theory is a bunch of A daggers. A bunch of A daggers acting on the vacuum. Okay. And you want to know how U acts on this. So what we will do is that you will write this as U A dagger U inverse, U A dagger U inverse, all the way up to U A dagger U inverse on vacuum. Is this okay so far? I have just introduced U inverse U in the middle, which doesn't do anything, right? This is identity. Okay, so this state is the same as this. And now what I'm saying is that because A dagger is constructed out of the phi's and the pi's, you know, if you know U phi U inverse, what it becomes, and U pi U inverse, what it becomes. You know what U A dagger U inverse becomes. Is that clear?
Yes.
So this will be given by some combinations of A's and A daggers, whatever it is. This will be given by some combinations of A's and A daggers. So at the end, you again re-express this in terms of A's and A daggers, and then act on U inverse on vacuum, which, as I said, we don't know yet what it is. But as long as this is known, everything else can be figured out. So this is the sense in which the relations that I described. Okay, let me go back to the. So this is the sense in which once you have assumed this, right? Once you have postulated that there is a U which satisfies this, and it satisfies this, you can figure out what U with A U inverse is, what U A dagger U inverse is, and as a result, you know how U acts on any particular state on the Hilbert. Is this clear?
Okay, sir. Yes, yes.
Okay. So this is in the example of Klein-Gordon context of Klein-Gordon theory, but in any general quantum field theory, right? There may not be the analogs of A's and A daggers, right? The theory may be more complicated. But nevertheless, it is true that all states are created by some combinations of the phi's and pi's acting on some particular state, which you can take to be the vacuum. And as a result, once you have defined U to satisfy this, you know the action of U on any other state in the theory. So this is what I have said here. Maybe I should have replaced, instead of saying that in terms of U on vacuum, I could have said U inverse on vacuum. But if you know U on vacuum, you can also figure out what U inverse on vacuum is. Are there other questions? Okay, so now we need to check the internal consistency. So what do you mean by internal consistency? That let's suppose we apply U on the vacuum by using this procedure. That gives you some U on something. And you apply U on the commutator of A dagger on vacuum. Now we know that the A dagger commutator is just a C number, right? It's some delta function acting on delta function. So it will be delta function on the vacuum. So U on the vacuum and U acting on A dagger commutator on the vacuum are basically the same state, except that there is a multiplicative delta function. But suppose you don't use the commutation relation of A dagger as to begin with. Okay? You manipulate it by writing this as A dagger plus minus A dagger A, okay? And then write UA U inverse, UA dagger U inverse minus UA dagger U inverse, UA U inverse. Then for UA U inverse, you already know some answer. For UA dagger U inverse, you already know some answer. So using those, you get another expression for this, what U does on A dagger on the vacuum. And now you have to ask if these are compatible, right? If you apply U directly on the vacuum, or you apply U on this commutator acting on the vacuum, do they give the same result? If they don't give the same result, then that means there's an incompatibility between these two. And then that's not a consistent postulate. Okay, this postulate then fails, not because you cannot define the action of U on some particular state, but because two different ways of defining the action of U on some particular state, they give different answers. Is this clear?
No, sir, I'm not sure what you're trying to do here.
Okay, so what we are saying is that we have argued here is that we postulate this. Okay, we said that we define U to be this. Once you have defined U to be this, then you can use this to calculate the action of U on any state on the Hilbert space. Is that clear? That's what I illustrated earlier in the context of Klein-Gordon theory. That any state in the Hilbert space is a product of A daggers on the state. So if I apply U on that state, right, you just write it as U A dagger U inverse, U A dagger U inverse many times acting on the state, and then use this to figure out what U A dagger U inverse is. So that's a new state in the Hilbert space, right? So defining U means what? That given any state on the Hilbert space, you should be able to say what U does on that state, what particular state it gives when U acts on that state. And this procedure does that. Is that point clear?
So initially we have phi and pi, phi r and pi r, using which we have some combination of A and A dagger, and
Yes.
that we know the entire Hilbert space in that case.
Yes.
Now we have phi r tilde and pi r tilde. For this, we'll have a new set of A and A daggers, right?
Okay, no. Phi r tilde is not independent. Phi r tilde is minus phi r, for example.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
In which case this will be minus A, not A. A tilde is not a new operator. It's minus A.
It's given in terms of the previous operators only.
Exactly. It's given in terms of previous operators only, right?
Yeah.
So in that sense, you acting on any state in the Hilbert space, right? There's only one Hilbert space, right? You are not building two different Hilbert spaces.
Yeah, yeah.
Acting on any state in the Hilbert space, what it does, you can figure out by using these relations.
Yes.
Okay. Now the question is, if you do it in two different ways, will you always get the same answer? Because given a state on the Hilbert space, right? Take vacuum. I can write it as a vacuum, or I can write it as A dagger on vacuum. Because A dagger commutator will give you 1, and then A on vacuum is 0, right?
Yeah.
So apply U on vacuum, and apply U on A dagger on vacuum. So when you apply U on A dagger on vacuum, right, you don't try to use the commutation relation from the beginning. You write U on A dagger as U A U inverse, U A dagger U inverse, and then U on vacuum. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Now U A U inverse has its expression, right? U A dagger U inverse has an expression. You use those expressions.
Yeah.
Then use the commutation relation. Now the question is, will it always give the same result?
Okay.
So the confusion is that because a given state can be represented in different ways, right? Because A dagger commutator, see, A and A dagger are not independent operators, right? If they had been independent operators, then there will be no confusion. Okay? We know that A dagger has a certain constraint that their commutator must be 1, okay, or their delta function. So you have to make sure that the action of U on the Hilbert space is consistent with that constraint. That if you apply an A dagger commutator on the state and then apply U, okay, or apply U first and then apply A dagger on the Hilbert space, it should give the same answer because A dagger commutator is just a C number. Is this point clear?
Yeah.
Okay. So basically what you have to check. So what you have to check is this. So you have said that U phi r U inverse is phi r tilde. We have said U pi r U inverse is phi r tilde. All the conditions like A dagger equal to 1, after all, come from the commutation relation for the phi's and the pi's. So you have to make sure that the commutation relation of the phi's and the pi's that we have is consistent with this postulate. So what does that mean? That we have postulated that phi r tilde, or we have not postulated, we have said that the theory is such that phi r tilde pi s tilde is delta rs times delta cube r minus r prime. Okay, so you can calculate it directly, okay, by using this. Okay, this is what is given to us. On the other hand, we also can write this phi r tilde pi s tilde by first writing phi r tilde as U phi r U inverse, pi s tilde as U pi s U inverse, and then you can cancel the U and U inverse and U in the middle and write this as U times phi r pi s times U inverse. And you have to make sure that these two are compatible, right? What you get from left hand side and what you get from the right hand side are give the same result. Is this point clear? It may look obvious, but later on we will see that this fails in one case. Okay, so it's not so obvious that this will always happen. So what we are saying here is that we have we know independently what this is. On the other hand, we can also calculate this by replacing phi r tilde by U phi r U inverse, pi s tilde by U pi s U inverse, and then doing some simple manipulation, okay, involving this product, this this relation. To write it as u times phi r pi s u inverse. And now you can calculate this independently. You can calculate this independently. And you have to check that the two calculations give the same result. Is this clear?
Sir, so here if they do not give the same result, then in the previous one also there will be a problem.
Okay, if they don't give the same result, that means there is a problem with this postulate. See, up to this point, we cannot do anything, right? Up to this point, this is what the theory gives. Okay?
Yes.
This is what we have postulated, right? That there is an operator U which satisfies this. So if they don't give the same result, then that means this postulate has a problem.
Oh, so then that means that U does not exist, or
Exactly. That will mean that such a U doesn't exist.
okay.
Right? Because as I argued that this tells you how to define U on any state in the Hilbert space. But this doesn't tell you that by using this procedure in different ways, you will always get the same state. Okay, and if this relation doesn't hold, if the two sides don't agree, then you have a problem that this will tell us that such a U cannot exist, because you can apply this on the Hilbert space, you can apply this on the Hilbert space, and they give different result.
So either we can check this equation, or we can check that U acting on 0 and U acting on A dagger commutation 0 give the same result, or we have to check both.
Yeah, but this is just one example, right? I mean, you have to do it for every possible state.
Okay.
Okay, so that's why what you should do is to check this on the basic constraint that you have on the operators, right? See, phi tilde r and pi tilde s had been completely independent operators, right? They just act on a state in different ways, and they always give the same result. They always give different results. Then this confusion wouldn't be there. Okay, you can define U exactly as I have suggested here, and that will be the end of it. It's only because phi and pi are not independent, right? They have to satisfy this kind of commutation relation. Okay, that they satisfy this and the analog for phi and pi. That these are not independent, and that's why you have to check that this is compatible with what conditions you have on the phi's and the pi's.
Okay, sir, and also this assumption that pi tilde equal to U phi U inverse, this implies that pi tilde is a linear function of phi.
No, this is for, yeah. So this applies, this is linearity in quantum mechanics. Okay. So it doesn't mean that phi tilde is a linear function of phi. As an operator, okay, phi tilde is U phi or U inverse. Phi tilde could be a phi square. It could be phi plus phi square, right? That can be a complicated operator. It's like in quantum mechanics, the phi's are playing the role of X in quantum mechanics, right? In quantum mechanics, if you have an operator U, right? Ux, U inverse. It doesn't go to only linear operator in X. Right? It goes to even differential operator, right? You can have an U which converts X to P.
Oh, okay.
So this linearity is on the Hilbert space, right? It doesn't say anything about what phi tilde r is, right? Phi tilde r is given to you. And then you have to check that if these equations are satisfied, then whether there is an existent U with this property.
So, but if you put phi 1 plus phi 2, then it will give me phi tilde 1 plus phi tilde 2 on right hand side.
Yes, that is true. But phi tilde 1 itself, right, is a function of phi, right? Phi tilde 1 could be phi 1 square.
Yes, so phi 1, okay. But in that case, phi 1 plus phi 2 whole square will not be equal to phi 1 square plus phi 2 square.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
So
phi 1 and phi 2 are different fields, no?
Okay.
See, phi, the fact that phi goes to a linear combination of phi, that's a very special kind of transformation. There may be transformations which are not of that kind. Okay, and indeed we'll encounter cases where the transformation is not linear. So what phi tilde r is as a function of phi, that's the property of the classical theory, right? The classical theory itself gives you the relation between phi tilde and phi r. This linearity that you are saying is a property of quantum mechanics, right? This linearity is this is an operator in the Hilbert space. This is an operator in the Hilbert space, right? And it is saying that there, if phi tilde 1 has been phi 1 square, right? This is telling us that there is a u that such that u phi 1 u inverse is equal to phi 1 square. U phi 2 u inverse is equal to phi 2 square. But that doesn't mean that u phi 1 plus phi 2 u inverse should be phi 1 plus phi 2 square. Think of the matrix algebra, right? Suppose u m1 u inverse is m1 prime. U m2 u inverse is m2 prime, just as matrices. Okay, doesn't mean that u m1 plus m2 u inverse is, sorry, suppose u m1 u inverse is m1 square. U m2 u inverse is m2 square. Then u m1 plus m2 u inverse is not equal to m1 plus m2 square necessarily.
Yes, yes.
Right?
Yes.
So what this is as a function of phi r, right? That's the analog of the m1 square on the right hand side, right? So you can find examples of matrices so that u m1 u inverse is m1 square, u m2 u inverse is m2 square, but u m1 plus m2 u inverse is not equal to m1 plus m2 square.
Oh, so then we have to find a different u, such that u m1 plus m2 u inverse is m1 plus m2.
No, that u may not be a symmetry, no?
Oh, okay.
Suppose you have two fields, right? Suppose phi 1 goes to phi 1 square is a symmetry, phi 2 goes to phi 2 square is a symmetry of the theory, but phi 1 plus phi 2 goes to phi 1 plus phi 2 square may not be a symmetry.
Okay, okay, okay.
So here you're talking about a symmetry of the theory, right? Those are specific kind of transformations. And those transformations need not be linear. Right? Many of the symmetry transformations that we have encountered so far are linear, but this is not a generic feature.
Okay. Yes.
Okay, are there other questions? Okay, so here we have to compare left hand side and right hand side. So let's compare it. What is left hand side? This we know is I delta cube r minus r prime. I forgot the delta rs. Okay, there is also a delta rs here. Okay. Here you see this. Here I delta rs delta cube r minus r prime. The right hand side is I delta cube r minus r prime. Again, delta rs is missing. Okay. And then u inverse, right? And that gives you 1 because u is a unitary operator. Okay. So u inverse is 1. Sorry, u inverse is always 1, but you know, the fact that u is unitary is an additional ingredient. Okay. So that gives you I delta q r minus r prime. So these two are indeed equal. Okay. So this shows that there is no inconsistency in postulating that u phi r u inverse is phi tilde r and u pi r u inverse is phi tilde r. Is this clear? Any question?
Sir,
Yes.
Sir, I have a doubt. Sir, in a discrete symmetry, you are saying that the phi r and phi tilde r are dependent. Both are dependent to each other.
Well, phi tilde r is always determined in terms of phi, right? In any symmetry transformation. Okay, here is an example. Let me. I have put some of the examples. These examples we discussed earlier. Let me see if I. Yeah. For example, parity. The phi tilde of TR is phi of T minus R, right?
Yes, sir.
So phi tilde R is determined in terms of phi. And using this, you can also determine pi tilde in terms of pi. So for any given symmetry transformation, the new fields are actually combinations of old fields, right? That's what we call a transformation.
Sir, yes, sir.
Okay. And phi tilde and pi tilde are dependent, and phi and pi are dependent. That has nothing to do with discrete symmetry. Right? That has to do with the fact that there is this commutation relation that has to be satisfied. So phi and pi cannot be completely arbitrary operator, right? Because they they have to satisfy the commutation relations of this kind, right? This is for phi tilde, pi tilde, but there is also similar relation involving phi and pi. So that is a sense in which phi and pi are not independent.
Okay, sir. Okay.
Any other question? Okay, so what we conclude from here is that indeed this postulate, okay, that U phi r U inverse is phi r tilde and U pi r U inverse is pi r tilde is consistent with the phi pi commutation relation. So you will not encounter inconsistencies of the kind that we described. Okay. Nevertheless, in the full quantum theory, sometimes there can be anomalies in the discrete symmetry. Okay. And for those, in those cases, such a U will not exist. Okay, but that's a much more complicated problem, and we are not going to discuss that in this course. Okay, but this is just something you may keep in mind. Okay, so now let's see what it implies for H. So H is given as some functional of phi r and pi r. So let's calculate U H U inverse. Now in the expression for H, right, when you say it's a functional of pi r and pi r, it means that it involves products of phi r's and pi r's in various combinations, right, integrals perhaps, okay, of products of phi's and pi's. Okay. But whenever you have a product of phi's and pi's, okay, and you have U and U inverse at the two ends, okay, you can use this formula, okay, that you keep inserting U and U inverse and U in the middle, okay, so that these now can be replaced by the transformed fields. So by doing that, I can write this as H of U phi r U inverse, U pi r U inverse, because any U inverse U combination that comes in the product of phi r's with phi r's or phi r's with pi r's, they'll all cancel out. Okay. And at the end, you will have a one U left on the extreme left, one U inverse on the extreme right. Okay. So that shows the equality of these two. Now I can replace U phi r U inverse by phi r tilde and U pi r U inverse by pi r tilde, okay, which are of course some given functions of phi r and pi r. And now we use the fact that H is supposed to be invariant, right? This relation over here, to replace H phi r tilde by H phi r. Okay, so we come back to the original H expressed in terms of the original fields. Is this step clear? Okay. So one simplified notation is that earlier I was using hat to denote that H is an operator, okay, to distinguish it from the classical Hamiltonian, but from now on we are going to not put the hats. Okay. But it should be understood that in quantum field theory, we are always basically talking about quantum operators. Okay. Sometimes we look at the classical limit, but it should be clear from the context. Okay, whether you are talking about operators or just classical objects. Okay. So these has to be thought of in sense of operators. Okay, everything here is an operator. Okay. So this tells us, if we look at the left and the right hand side, okay, that U H U inverse is H. So you can multiply by U from the right to get UH equal to HU. So that means U commutes with H. And this in turn means that U is time independent. Sorry, time independent. I made a mistake here. This should be U is time independent. And once you have established that U is time independent, it follows that this relation, see earlier we said that we set T equal to 0, right? All these manipulations are being done at T equal to 0, okay, because you are building the Hilbert space. Okay, it's saying, it just said my internet connection is unstable. I hope you can hear me. I think yes. I can hear it. Cursor moving. Okay. Okay. So what I was saying here is earlier we had set T equal to 0. Okay, but once we have established that U is time independent, okay, then you can take these relations to be valid at all time, okay, not just at T equal to 0. Okay. Basically, the phi r of x, okay, at any given time, you can write as e to the IH T phi r of t equal to 0 e to the minus iht, and then take the e to the iht outside u, and that way you can establish that these relations hold in general for all time. Again, this is something that we have seen in the case of continuous symmetry. There you are not talking in terms of u phi u inverse, but there you are talking in terms of q commutated with phi. This is what generalizes what you had for the continuous symmetry. In the continuous symmetry, you had a relation involving q commutated with phi. Here you have u phi r u inverse. Okay, are there questions?
Sir, so if the u contain the time, then if we take the derivative of this u phi u inverse, then it will not be consistent with u phi u inverse, because phi contains some derivatives of phi, time derivative.
Indeed, that is true.
So
right?
from there also we can say that u must be independent of time.
Okay, I think it's somewhat circular, right? I have in making this conclusion, right? U is time independent, right? So du dt has a term which involves UH commutator, okay? And then there is a del H del U del T, right? Which is if U has an explicit time dependence. Okay? So here I have assumed implicitly that U doesn't have explicit time dependence, okay? Which basically is the statement that this symmetric transformation that we have here, right? I mean, this we had seen earlier, right? In terms of Q. Q starts having explicit time dependence if the symmetric transformation that we're talking about here has action on time. Okay? If the phi r tilde x is related to phi r of x, okay, in a way that t prime, the argument of phi r, okay, that appears on the right hand side is not the same as the argument of phi r that appears on the left hand side, okay, then U starts getting time dependent. Okay. So here I am implicitly assuming that in the construction of U, there is no explicit time dependence. Okay. So UH commutator vanishing, okay, basically will then imply that U is time independent. Is this point clear?
Okay, yes.
So this would, for Lorentz generators, I mean a similar thing for the Lorentz generator, right? The QH commutator doesn't vanish for the Lorentz generator, okay? Even though the ddt of Q is 0. So here, as I said, I have assumed implicitly that U doesn't act on time. Okay. Later on, we will encounter a situation where U does act on time, okay, and you will see that the situation there is somewhat different.
Okay.
Okay, are there questions?
Sir, for
Yes.
For anomalous symmetries, this unitary operators won't exist?
That's right, yes. For anomalous symmetries, these unitary operators will not exist.
Okay.
Any other question? Okay, so now let's work out the consequences. Okay. So let's suppose that you have the ground state, okay, and let's further suppose that the ground state is an eigenstate of U and U inverse. Okay, if it's an eigenstate of U, it will also be an eigenstate of U inverse. Okay. So it's not very unreasonable to assume that the ground state is an eigenstate of U, because after all, U commutes with H, right? We saw here that U commutes with H. Okay. So in particular, if the ground state is unique, as in the case of Klein-Gordon theory, okay, then it better be that ground state is an eigenstate of U. Okay, because otherwise, U acting on the ground state, we'll have to take it to something which has the same energy, right? Because U and H commutes. So if there is a unique ground state, then ground state will be an eigenstate of U. Okay. So if it's an eigenstate of U, okay, then because U is a unitary operator, the eigenstates must be of the form of a pure phase, e to the I alpha. Okay. And then by taking the conjugate, Hermitian conjugate, you get this relation, okay, that the bra corresponds to the ground state acted upon by U gives you to the minus I alpha acting on the ground state. Okay. So in this case, okay, we can start with a correlation function like with a matrix element like this. Okay, vacuum expectation value of phi tilde T1 R1, phi tilde T2 R2 up to phi tilde Tn Rn, and then insert U here and U inverse on the left, on the right, because U doesn't do anything. U inverse doesn't do anything, right? U dagger acting on the vacuum gives you the I alpha. Sorry, I didn't go to state the logic properly. Okay, so going from here to here, all you are doing is that you are replacing phi tilde by U phi U inverse. Okay, so phi tilde T1 R1 I replace by U phi T1 R1 U inverse. Phi tilde T2 R2 you replace by U phi T2 R2 U inverse, and so on. Then these things cancel. All the U inverse U terms in the middle cancel. So you have one U left over at the extreme left end, one U dagger or U inverse left over at the extreme right end. Now you use the fact that U dagger on this gives you to the I alpha on the vacuum. This gives you to the minus I alpha on the vacuum. So you get back the original matrix element of phi T1 R1 up to phi Tn R1. Is this clear? So this is the analog of the relation that we had found for continuous symmetry. Right? We had exactly this kind of relation for continuous symmetry. Okay, finite continuous symmetry, but we see here is that this holds also for discrete symmetries. And if the ground state is not an eigenstate of U and U dagger, then of course this relation doesn't exist. And in that case, we say that the symmetry is spontaneously broken. This is again analogous to what happened for the continuous symmetry. For the continuous symmetry, the corresponding condition was that the Q on the ground state is non-zero. There the condition was that Q on the ground state should give you 0. Here the condition is that U on the ground state should give you a pure phase. In fact, this phase is in fact irrelevant, because if U dagger on the ground state gives you to the I alpha on the ground state, you can always absorb it to the minus I alpha in the definition of U. And then this gives you 1. Right? So here, for example, you can write this as vacuum U e to the I alpha is equal to vacuum, and then declare U e to the I alpha as just a new unitary operator, which the commutation relations don't change because you are just multiplying by overall phase. So U inverse just cancels, this phase cancels out. So a simpler way to state this is that either you annihilate, U acting on the ground state gives you back the ground state. Okay. In that case, you have a relation like this. Okay. Or U acting on the ground state doesn't give you back the ground state, in which case the symmetry is spontaneously broken and you don't have relations of this kind. Is this clear?
Hello, sir. When U is commuting with H, doesn't it satisfy, like confirm that the ground state has to be the eigenstate of U also?
Well, not necessarily, right? Because H could, if the ground state is degenerate.
Oh yes, yes. For in the case of degeneration,
the ground state can give you to another state, to another ground state, right? Normally in quantum mechanics, you would have said that they would take linear combinations to construct all simultaneous eigenstates of U and H. But it turns out that in quantum field theory, that's not always possible. The linear combinations are not good states. And as a result, it could happen that even though U and H commute, right? So U is a genuine symmetry of the theory. Nevertheless, it's not realized in this way. Okay, that it's not a symmetry of the matrix elements because U doesn't annihilate the ground state. U doesn't give the ground state, leave the ground state unchanged. If the ground state is not degenerate, then what you are saying is correct, right? Then U and the ground state has to give you back the ground state.
So how do we interpret degenerate ground states?
Well, probably this is not something that we'll discuss in this course, right? I mean, we'll see that there are examples where there is a degenerate ground state, right? Okay, I mean, I can just tell you the following example. Like suppose in Klein-Gordon theory, right? You have the half m square phi square, which is like a potential, right? If you think of the the Hamiltonian, right? In Hamiltonian, there is a half m square phi square that is added, right? You could, in principle, replace it by some function of phi, okay, instead of just half m square phi square. So in particular, you can choose a function of phi which has the shape of a double OL, double OL.
Yeah.
Okay. So in that case, it will have two minimum, right?
Yes.
Phi equal to say minus a and a, and those will correspond to two degenerate ground state. Okay, this is a classical picture, but there is an analogous quantum version of this. So those two minima will correspond to two degenerate ground state. And in that case, the phi goes to minus phi symmetry is spontaneously broken because neither one of them is invariant under phi goes to minus phi, right? One, if the phi equal to a goes to phi equal to minus a and vice versa.
So in this sort of a picture, do we have two different sets of A and A dagger? Like
yes, exactly. So you have to have one. So basically, you have two different theories. They are equivalent, right? Because of the symmetry, they are equivalent. Okay. You can insert one set of vacuum A dagger around the one minimum, and another set of vacuum A dagger on the other, around the other. And there is no sensible way to take linear combinations of those states and declare this as the eigenstate of U.
All right.
Are there other questions? Okay, so here I have given some examples of discrete symmetry, right? Both of these are symmetries of Klein-Gordon theory. One is parity, okay, where you take phi tilde TR to be phi T minus R. The other one is phi tilde TR is minus phi TR. These are often called internal symmetries. Okay, so any symmetry that doesn't change the argument of phi, okay, that space-time argument is typically called an internal symmetry. Okay, so this is in that sense an internal symmetry. Okay. And you can easily see the consequence of this, okay, that because phi tilde is minus phi, right? Now if we apply it to this side, this equation, right? You got the left hand side and right hand side. Okay. So if you replace phi tilde by minus phi, right? That's a symmetry. Okay, so you could have done that. Okay. Then on the left hand side, you get minus 1 to the n times the matrix element that appears on the right hand side. So this means what? This means that if n is odd, then on the left hand side you have minus of the right hand side. So only way that equation can be true is if this one vanishes. Is that logic clear? So let me repeat again. If phi tilde is minus phi, right, on the left hand side, we have minus 1 to the n times the matrix element that you have on the right hand side. See, in order that these two are equal, right, that's a consequence of symmetry. We can easily, immediately say that for any odd n, this quantity must vanish. So that's a consequence of symmetry. But of course, you can also explicitly calculate this quantity and verify that that's the case. Is this okay? Okay, so now let me discuss a new kind of discrete symmetries, okay, a new example of a discrete symmetry, okay, which will provide an exception to what we have done. Okay. And this is what is called time reversal symmetry. So time reversal symmetry has this property that it changes. So now let's for a while work in the Lagrangian or the action formalism, okay, but we'll come back to canonical formalism in a few minutes. So time reversal symmetry basically changes the argument of time argument of phi, sign of the time argument of phi, right? So phi tilde of TR, phi tilde R of TR is phi R of minus TR. Okay. And the corresponding action on the Lagrangian density is that it changes the arguments, okay, of phi from T to T prime, but T prime is as minus T. Okay, this is like the kind of transformations that we are having earlier, Lorentz transformation or time translation, right? It just changes the arguments to the transformed argument, okay, T prime. And you can easily check, for example, that for the Klein-Gordon action, this is a symmetry, right? If you replace T by minus T in the Klein-Gordon action, okay, then the action remains unchanged, okay? And the Lagrangian, in fact, precisely transforms in this way. Lagrangian density. Now, I should say that this is not the most general transformation. You can also put a matrix, for example, right? Like in the Lorentz transformation, we had put a SRS matrix, right? You could put similar matrix here, but the results that we're going to describe will not change, right? So that's why I have not done that. I have taken the simple form of the transformation laws. So is this clear? The transformation law? This is what is called time reversal symmetry for obvious reason, because it reverses the sign of the time coordinate.
If we had a matrix, then would we still call it time reversal?
Yeah, we would still call it time reversal as long as the argument is it acts on the argument of phi this way. Just like even after you had a matrix, you still call it Lorentz transformation, right? Because on the argument, it took phi tilde r of x as phi r of lambda x, even though there is a matrix outside.
Okay.
So whether we need a matrix or not, that may depend on the theory, right? This may not be a symmetry of the theory, but after putting some matrix, it may become a symmetry of the theory.
I see. Okay.
So that will be dictated by the theory, okay? But we'll still call it time reversal as long as t goes to minus t in the argument. Okay, so now let's see what happens to the time derivative of phi tilde r. Okay, that's easy. This is time derivative of phi r of minus t r. I have just used this. And this, using the fact that t prime is minus t, okay, I can write this as minus del t prime of phi r of t prime r. And so using this, I can now calculate what is pi tilde r of tr. Okay, because after all, what is pi tilde r of tr? It's the derivative of Lagrangian density with respect to del t phi tilde r of tr. But this we know is minus del t prime phi r of t prime r, right? So I put the minus sign here and write it as del t prime of phi r t prime r. Lagrangian density, okay, by this postulate, it just keeps the same form with phi replaced by phi r replaced by the argument of phi r replaced by t prime. Okay, so that's what happens here. And then by definition, we can see that this quantity is nothing but pi r of t prime r, okay? Because that's the definition of pi. So this minus sign. And now by using t prime equal to minus t, I can write this as minus pi r of minus t r. Is this clear? Okay. So here what we are saying is that by starting with this postulate that phi tilde r changes this way, and then the Lagrangian density changes simply by reversing the sign of the time coordinate in the argument, okay, we conclude that pi tilde r, okay, is related to pi r in this particular way. Okay, so the time argument changes, but there's a minus sign. Okay, so in a sense, you have got a matrix, right? Minus 1 is not 1, right? So it's a trivial matrix, 1 by 1 matrix, okay, but still a minus sign. Now I leave it as an exercise. It's just a very easy exercise to check that using the definition of the Hamiltonian, that when you calculate h of phi tilde r, okay, you have to basically replace this del t of phi r by here del t of phi r by del t of phi tilde r, and then rewrite it in this way. And similarly, you have to write the pi tilde r, okay, by in terms of pi r by using this formalism. Okay. We can show that this remains unchanged. This becomes h of phi r. Okay. The time coordinate gets changed, phi r of with minus t and pi r of minus t, but those are of course the same as phi r of t and pi r of, because h is time independent, right? So we can replace this by h of phi r. Is this clear? Okay, this is a simple algebra that you can check. So h is invariant. So up to this point, the argument, the results seem similar to what we had earlier. But now we have a difference from what we had earlier. And the difference comes from calculating the Poisson bracket. So if you calculate the Poisson bracket of phi tilde r and pi tilde s, that's phi tilde r is given by phi r of minus tr. Pi tilde s is given by minus pi s of minus tr prime. Sorry, this is not r prime. This is r. Sorry, this is r. Yeah, this was r prime, so this is r prime. Okay. So phi tilde r is given by phi r of minus tr. Pi tilde s is given by pi s of minus t r prime. They are Poisson bracket, but of course you know what this Poisson bracket is. This is minus delta q r minus r prime. Is this point clear? Okay, this minus sign is a crucial difference from what we had earlier. Because in the earlier case of other symmetries, we had assumed that this is equal to delta q of r minus r prime. Now, what we see that the sign of the Poisson bracket has changed. So in quantum theory, when you do this, that translates to, this was the original commutation relation, and the phi tilde r and pi tilde s has a different commutation relation. There is a minus sign. So even though the Hamiltonian remains unchanged and the Lagrangian remains unchanged, but of course you don't have to go back to the Lagrangian anymore, right? In the canonical formulation, you only care about the Hamiltonian. The problem is that this transformation is not a canonical transformation because the Poisson bracket is not preserved. And that means in the quantum theory, the commutator bracket is not preserved. There's an extra minus sign. But this will mean that we cannot have a unitary operator u such that this relation holds. So the same manipulation that we did earlier, which showed consistency of this with the existence of unitary operator, with the existence of commutation relations, now will fail. So it's the same manipulation but with an extra minus sign, right? So let's go through this. So if you take phi r tilde pi s tilde commutator, then you replace phi r tilde by u phi r u inverse, this by u pi s u inverse, then u and u inverse comes out, you get phi r pi s, that's u times I delta q r minus r prime using this u inverse, and that will give you I delta q r minus r prime, which is obviously inconsistent with the relation that we have here, minus I. Is this point clear? Okay. So now I'll give you the solution. Okay. So the solution that one has here is that you have to take u to be an anti-unitary operator. So let me tell you what exactly one means by an anti-unitary operator. So let's suppose that you have a given basis alpha. Okay, some basis of states, doesn't have to be energy eigenstate, some basis alpha, and you have a state A which is decomposed in that basis. So these A alphas are just numbers, sum over alpha, A alpha times alpha. Then if U is an anti-unitary operator, that means the action of U on A is given by sum over alpha beta, A alpha star, and this alpha is replaced by a unitary transformation of the basis vector. So alpha is replaced by W alpha beta beta. So normally, for a unitary transformation in a given basis, this would have been A alpha times W alpha beta beta. That's the way a unitary matrix acts, or a unitary operator acts, right? It gives a unitary linear combination of the original coefficients, right? A alpha W alpha beta. The crucial new ingredient here for an anti-unitary operator is this fact that A alpha has gotten conjugated to A alpha star. Is this clear?
Sir, can you please repeat once again?
Okay, so suppose U was a unitary operator and you have some basis alpha. Then if you take a state A which has a decomposition of this kind, then U on A would have been given by sum over alpha beta, A alpha, W alpha beta beta, where W is a unitary matrix. Is that point here for a unitary transformation? Because a unitary transformation just gives you a unitary linear combination of the basis states, right? So acting on alpha, a unitary transformation will just give you a W alpha beta beta, where W is a unitary matrix.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, so this would have been just A alpha in the case of unitary transformation. The anti-unitary transformation, on the other hand, tells us that this A alphas will get converted to A alpha star. That's the way we define the action of an anti-unitary operator on a given state. Is this point clear? So this is not a unitary transformation, right? See, what is the meaning of a transformation? A transformation is that given any state, you have to say what happens to that state under that transformation, right? Under that operation, right? So when you say that U is some operator, okay, in the Hilbert space, that means that for every state in the Hilbert space, you have to specify what U does to it. Okay. Now, how do you characterize a state in the Hilbert space? By first choosing a basis state and then writing the state as a linear combination of the basis state, right? So given any state of this kind, if I tell you what U will do on this state, then I've specified my operator, right? It may be unitary, it may be non-unitary, it may be anti-unitary, okay? But as long as I have specified what U does on every state in the Hilbert space, that gives an operator. Is that point clear? I mean, it's like think of U as a matrix, right? Big infinite dimensional matrix, and to specify U, I have to specify every component of the matrix, right? That means I have to specify how U acts on every basis vector. And what I'm saying is that given any vector, okay, I specify U acting on that state by this. Okay, this is my definition of what U does to this particular state. Is this point clear? So let me repeat again. So any state can be expressed in terms of linear combination. And what I'm saying here is that I have to specify what U does to every state in the Hilbert space. And this is what it does. Okay. W is some fixed unitary matrix. Okay, that may differ between different anti-unitary operators. Okay. But the crucial point is that it changes A alpha to A alpha star. Is this point clear? Any other confusion? Okay. So this has a very strange feature, okay, which is the following. That let's suppose that you have a complex number C. Then U on C times A is given by U. C times A is C A alpha times alpha, right? Just look at this. C times A, I can always take the C to a summation. Right? I can write as C A alpha on alpha. And now we apply the definition of how U acts on a state, right? This is our new A alpha, right? C times A alpha is our new A alpha. So it should conjugate this. It will become C star times A alpha star. And then of course you have the W alpha beta beta, right? This is the same W. Okay? This doesn't depend on what the A alphas are, right? This is some particular matrix, unitary matrix. So now you can again pull the C star out of the summation, and you get C star acting on times U on A. And this is true for every state A. So which means that you have a strange relation, which is that U times C, where C is just a C number, is C star times U. Is this point clear? And this is the reason why it's not a linear operator. It cannot be represented simply as a matrix. It has a matrix action, but also it has complex conjugates. So this I can always also write as U C U inverse as C star. Is this okay? Are there questions?
Hello?
Yes.
Yeah, you said we cannot write a matrix form for it because it's not a linear operator.
Yes.
So, like non-linear operators do not even have eigenvalues, right?
Well, it's not exactly non-linear, right? It does it. It's not linear, but it's what is called antilinear.
Yeah. Like, do we define eigenvalues for these operators?
You could, yes, you could. Okay, but these eigenvalues have some strange properties. Okay, but you could certainly define eigenstates of these operators. Okay, you could ask if a state is invariant under U, for example.
Okay.
Sir, so if we take U acting on the basis vector alpha,
Yes.
then we will get sum over W alpha beta beta.
Yes.
So then W alpha beta, but still W alpha beta are not the matrix elements of U.
No, you cannot think of W because U is not exactly, the W alpha betas are not the matrix elements of U. Okay, it's the matrix element of U between alpha and beta.
Yes, so that's what I got confused.
Yeah, it is. It is the matrix element of U between alpha and beta. But you cannot represent U as a matrix. Action of U on the Hilbert space cannot be represented as a matrix because those are linear operators, right?
Yes.
See, multiplication by matrix is linear operator, right?
Yes.
So if you take a vector and multiply it by C number and apply the matrix, that is the same as applying the matrix first and then multiply by the C number. So you cannot be represented as a matrix. You cannot calculate matrix elements of U, right? But it's not representable as a matrix because it involves this complex conjugation.
Okay.
So this is important that if you are thinking in terms of matrix algebra, right, the action of U on a state is not just a matrix, not a matrix acting on the state, because those are all linear operators. U, on the other hand, is an anti-linear operator because it involves a complex conjugation.
Can't we show it like a linear operator times something that conjugates scalars?
Yes, you can, right? That will correspond to choosing an appropriate basis unit to W alpha beta as identity matrix. Right? That could be possible. But that still doesn't mean that U is trivial, right? Because it has a complex conjugation involved. Is that your question, or maybe I didn't answer it properly?
No, yeah, I've got it.
So the important point is not W alpha beta, right? This could vary between from one basis to another. This could change. Okay? The important point is this one, that the coefficients get complex conjugated. Okay? So you have this strange relation that U C U inverse is C star, okay? And that clearly shows that it cannot be a linear operation, that it cannot be represented as matrices, because if there's matrices, then matrix times C number times the inverse of a matrix is always a C number itself. It doesn't involve complex conjugation. But once you have this, we see that it is now consistent to introduce an anti-unitary operator such that this follows. So you don't demand that there is a unitary operator for which this is true, but we can demand that there is an anti-unitary operator for which this is true, and we can see why this is consistent. Okay, again, repeat exactly the same analysis. Phi tilde r pi tilde s. Okay, so this is U phi r U inverse, U pi s U inverse. U inverse U is 1 by definition, right? U inverse is a reverse action of U. So it just nullifies what U did. So that gives you U times times the commutator of phi r with pi s U inverse. Now this one is I times delta Q r minus r prime. So up to this point, it's exactly what we had done earlier. But now we see that because there is an I sitting here, U inverse is minus I. If U is an anti-unitary operator. So we get minus I times delta Q bar minus r prime. And this indeed is the correct commutator. Phi tilde r pi tilde s commutator. In fact, that's where we started. Phi tilde r pi tilde s commutator has a minus I delta Q bar minus r prime. And indeed, an anti-unitary operator will do that.
Sir,
And from this, we can work out the consequence of time reversal symmetry as before. Yes, go ahead, please.
Can we think of U, the action of U on some state as like W composed with some dagger?
Yes, you can. So U can be thought of as W, which is a unitary operation, right, followed by this complex conjugation.
Okay.
So this part is trivial, right? Because this is just a normal unitary operation. So I could have taken U times W inverse. Okay, that's also an anti-unitary operator. Okay, that would not have the W sitting here. So W is not the important part. Okay, I have just put the W in to say that a general anti-unitary operator will also have this W here. But the important point is the fact that the A gets complex conjugated to A star.
Okay.
Are there other questions?
Just on that point again, that when we define eigenstates for U, they sort of are not like uniquely chosen in the sense that linear combinations of them are not eigenstates. Like
Linear combinations with real coefficients are eigenstates,
yeah,
but with complex coefficients in Derby. So U is a strange operator, right? But this is what you have to do if you want to include time reversal symmetry. If the theory has time reversal symmetry, and the only way to define properly define time reversal symmetry is by using an anti-unitary operator. Okay, so if there are no other questions, maybe I'll ask everybody who is not crediting the course to sign out. And then we'll have a brief meeting with the people who are crediting the course.
One last question, sir.
Yes.
So for quantum mechanics, if suppose U and H is commuting, then and suppose the ground state is degenerated, then still we can diagonalize in that degenerate space. You can take some linear combination of that and still diagonalize that U.
Yes.
But you said that it's not possible in QFT.
That's right.
Can you specify that? So can you specify that point a bit?
Yeah. So this, as I said, I mean, is really a part of the QFT2 course, right? This is called spontaneous symmetry breaking, and I gave the example that if you have a potential of the WL kind, right, in quantum mechanics, you can construct even and odd states, right, by taking linear combinations of the states around each individual minimum. But this is not possible in quantum field theory, because the WL potential means that at every point in space, okay, there is this WL form, right? Because phi is a field.
Yes.
So you have the state built on the first ground state, first perturbative ground state, okay, and the states built on the second perturbative ground state, and their overlap is identically zero, right? And it doesn't make sense to take linear combinations of the two, because a linear combination will mean that at every point in space, right, you are taking linear combinations whose overlap is zero. And if you consider this kind of ground state, it will violate many desirable properties of the quantum field theory. And you cannot really declare that you take the sum and difference of these two ground states and work with those.
Okay.
What you can do in quantum field mechanics, right, you cannot do in quantum field theory. And as I said, to understand this, to really go through the QFT2 course, right, where the spontaneous symmetry breaking is discussed in more detail.
Okay, sir. Thank you.